Okay, you're live.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second in our series of online panel discussions, Conversations on Glass by Apice, which is taking place as part of the Venice Glass Week, which is the international festival dedicated to the art of glass, which is now in its fourth edition, taking place here in Venice and Murano from the 5th to the 13th of September 2020. My name is Camilla Purden, and I work as the festival coordinator of the Venice Glass Week, working for the organising committee that is responsible for the festival. The festival committee is made up of the 5 important institutions connected to the art of glass here in Venice, and that is the Fondazione Giorgio Cini, with Le Stanze del Vetro, the Fondazione Musei Civici di Venezia, the Istituto Veneto di Scienze, Lettere ed Arti, the Consorzio Promovetro Murano, and the Comune di Venezia, which is Venice's town council. This year, for the first time, we're really happy to be presenting a series of online panel discussions, 7 of them, under the umbrella Conversations on Glass by Apice, which is one of the most important and prestigious transport companies for works of art, but specializing especially also in the transportation of glassworks. So every day during the festival, we're presenting a daily discussion on a different theme to do with the art of glass. And we're involving high-profile speakers from around the world connected to the sector, with the aim of providing a platform for discussion and reflection on various topics relating to glass. The topics are, the conversations are taking place in English rather than Italian, and that's because we're trying specifically to offer an aspect of the festival for those, particularly around the world, who aren't able to join us here in Venice, unfortunately, perhaps this year because of the complications with transportation from around the world. So this is in English, and we were very happy to welcome people who are watching from all corners of the globe, even if you're not able to be here with us this year in Venice. So for those of you who are watching, you will be watching via YouTube, and we're streaming live. We, the speakers and the moderator, are participating in a Zoom call, but we invite you, if you're watching, to, if you'd like to ask any questions of any of the speakers, do please put them into the chat section of YouTube, and we'll be relaying them to the moderator, who will be happy to put them to the speakers at the end of our conversation. So all questions warmly invited. Today's conversation, which is the second in the series, is titled Collecting Glass Today. And it's moderated by Lucinda Breeden, who we're very happy to see, who's joining us from London. Lucinda is the Global Director of Communications for Bonhams, who is one of the main sponsors of the Venice Glass Week this year. Before coming to Bonhams, Lucinda began her career as a curator and was head of exhibitions at the Milton Keynes Gallery for 4 years before becoming a very well-respected and well-known art critic and journalist, writer for various publications, including the Evening Standard, Harper's Bazaar, the Sunday Telegraph, and more. Amazingly, she's launched more than 11 different magazines, including the Bonhams magazine, of which she is currently editor. We're also so happy to be joined by Dan Tolson, all the way from New York. Dan is the International Director of the Modern Decorative Art and Design Department for Bonhams in New York. Dan he's a veteran of the international design scene and has been in the market for over 20 years. He founded the design department at a major international auction house in the late 90s and went on to play a leading role in the field of design at Christie's in London for 10 years, under which time he saw many landmark auctions, including Modernism from a Californian collection in 2007. Since 2012, Dan has been developing design auctions in Los Angeles and most recently New York, where he's based. In 2016, he oversaw the sale of Thomas Stearns's masterwork Facades of Venice, which actually achieved the then world record for an example of modern Italian glass. And importantly, Dan is also on the jury of the Bonhams Prize for the Venice Glass Week, which is a prize now in its second edition for the best project in the festival. And actually that will be awarded tomorrow at a ceremony that's taking place at 6 p.m. Italian time. And it's being streamed live on YouTube. So anybody who'd like to watch and see who is being awarded the Bonhams Prize tomorrow, please do join us via YouTube. We're also being joined by Dina Rigby, who is also joining us from the States. Dina is an art advisor and appraiser and the owner of Dina Rigby Fine Arts. Dina's been working in fine art, particularly engaging with contemporary glass since 1995. And her work in studio glass has included managing and representing some of the most well-known glass sculptors in the United States. She's been a consultant and a member of staff and instructor at the Pilchuck Glass School, who here at the Venice Glass Week we also collaborate closely with. She has clients ranging from private collectors to international corporations, architects, healthcare groups, and she also is a certified member of the Appraisers Association of America. So we're very happy to welcome you, Dina, today. We're also joined by Giorgio Pace, who glamorously is joining us from on board a boat in the middle of the sea near Ponza. So Giorgio, we're kind of amazed that you're able to join us with such a good connection at this stage. Hopefully it'll last out. I'm sure everyone's very envious of the backdrop. Giorgio is the co-founder of Nomad, the itinerant showcase for collectible design and contemporary art, which saw actually an edition in Venice in collaboration with the Venice Glass Week last year. Spectacular showcase. Giorgio started his career at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York and has since worked with numerous prestigious institutions, including the Venice Biennale, the Solomon Guggenheim Museum, the Bard Graduate Center for Decorative Arts. He's consulted all sorts of organizations, including the Dasha Zhukova on the Garage Museum in Moscow, and he's engaged in publishing. But his knowledge of art and expertise in business development led him to launch Giorgio Pace Projects, which is a creative consultancy that assists luxury brands to connect with art and culture enterprises. And then finally, we're really delighted to be joined by Merrily Orsini, whose passion for contemporary glass began back in 1997. She's since developed this passion through years of travel and research and visits and collecting together with her husband, F.G. Rick Heath. Merrily holds the prestigious position of the president of the Art Alliance for Contemporary Glass and has served on the glass arts community through board service with all sorts of different bodies, including the North Carolina Glass Center Board of Directors, the Creative Glass Center of America, and she served as the co-chair of the Glass Art Society's 40th annual conference back in 2010. Merrily is the president and CEO of Core Cubed, which is the 5th startup business that she's founded. And her business endeavors, very impressive as they are, have won her many accolades, including the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award for Kentucky and Indiana, with an induction into the Entrepreneur of the Year Institute. So a really, really interesting, diverse collection of speakers that we've got here today to talk about the art of collecting glass today. Before I hand over, though, to Lucinda, who's I know has got some really interesting questions lined up for the speakers, I just want to say that we're also joined by a representative of our sponsor, Apice, Marta Pomiato, who is one of Apice's exhibition managers. And so before I hand over to Lucinda, I'd just like to invite Marta to say a few words, perhaps on behalf of Apice. So Marta, over to you. You might just need to unmute your, there we go.
Thank you, Camilla.
Wonderful.
Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you all for joining this meeting. It's an honor for me to be here representing our company, Apice. These conversations are part of the initiatives we are taking as Apice Group to be involved in the cultural life of our territory. Apice has been taking care of art handling all over the world for the last 30 years. And this year, we decided to promote these conversations, specifically in order to give even more space to the culture of glass in our city. I say culture because there are so many aspects connected to glassmaking in Venice that it cannot be defined only by the artistic side of it or to manufacturing, history, or tourism that it brings to our city. We think that glass represents part of the identity of the city, that is, and its importance goes beyond all of these aspects I just mentioned. We could even say that it's one of the milestones of Venice brand, so to say. This is one of the reasons why we in Apice thought that these conversations could be a way to connect all of these fundamental aspects and integrate them. Glass is so important for us that we not only take all our efforts to protect it while we transport it, but also we do our best to enhance and draw the attention to its value. And the value of art is not inherent, as we all here very well know. We hope that this conversation will help people to connect around the world, as you said earlier, because we know how difficult this year has been. And even though we cannot meet in person here in Venice, this is a special occasion to use all of our resources to be present and support Venice Glass Week. Thank you for being here and for your attention.
Thank you so much, Marta. That was a really, really nice message. And so the perfect moment to hand over to Lucinda to fire away. Thank you, Lucinda.
Thanks so much, Camilla. And thank you to everybody who's joined us. I know that those of us at home would absolutely adore to be in Venice, looking at all the glorious works and the exhibitions and enjoying the floating furnace. But one silver lining that I've heard from many people in the glass community is that online engagement, which we've all just discovered, has actually drawn them closer together, and that people are having more conversations about all sorts of things as a result of discovering Zoom, Teams, etc. So I'm plucking at straws here. Anyway, we're very, very lucky to have some of the most interesting voices in the glass world with us to discuss collecting up glass today. And I thought the best way to start is to ask each of them about how they first fell in love with glass and what they started to collect. Dan, I know you began collecting at a very young age. Could you just tell us about those early years and your current involvement with glass at Bonhams and with the festival, of course?
Yeah, of course. I think like many collectors, I started collecting at a young age, and growing up in the north of England, I would go to the local flea market every Saturday, and this was sort of in my early teens, and I was really drawn to Italian glass at that age because I was really drawn to the vibrant colours, the organic and abstract shapes. And of course, I didn't know what I was looking at back then, but I kind of really went with what I liked and what I was sort of passionate about, which I think is a really key sort of a key sort of tip for any collector is really to buy what you like and buy what you're passionate about. Fast forward to 1996, and after university, I moved to London, and that's when I started working in the design department at Bonhams. So in the week, I would be talking to glass collectors and advising consigners. And then on the weekends, I would then go down to Portobello Road Market, which now, is obviously a world famous market. But back in the sort of late 90s and early 2000s, it was a really important international hub for collectors. There were some fantastic dealers there, and you would literally bump into world-class collectors on Portobello Road. So it was a great place to be, to sort of swap ideas with collectors and dealers. And also back then there was very little literature around on Italian glass. So it was really a frontier at that time. So it was an opportunity to really engage with fellow collectors and sort of share information. So it was a real sort of collegiate atmosphere back then. My job at Bonhams, I'm incredibly lucky to have this job. I get to travel to meet collectors, and until recently, of course, with COVID, where I've been stuck in New York since March. And obviously we've all been concerned about how this is going to affect our businesses, but really it's been very positive, certainly from my perspective, because I've actually spent more time talking to collectors since COVID started than at probably any other time in the past 20 years. People really want to talk, they're stuck at home. So I've had a lot more sort of interaction, I'd say, with fellow collectors over the past few months. And Bonhams as a company, we're incredibly excited to be involved in Venice Glass Week this year. We're an auction house, we're obviously involved in selling, but as a company as well, we're also interested in promoting excellence in design, in contemporary design. And really the Bonhams Prize is an opportunity for us to give something back to the community and to really sort of help shine a spotlight on contemporary makers and really give some limelight to the talent that's in Venice and Murano at this moment.
Thanks so much, Dan. That was great. Dina, you've been a real figure in American glass, and I'd love to know how you started, how you first became engaged with it all.
Yeah, so my first job with an art gallery was in 1995 with Donald Foster. And Don was the first dealer in Seattle to pick up Dale Chihuly and exhibit his work as fine art. And he went on to pick up Flora Mason, Joy Kirkpatrick, Richard Royal, William Morris. And so when I started, it was in the midst of working with all of these artists. And we also were carrying artists like Mark Tobey, who was a Northwest master. And we always saw the glass work as being in context of all of this other wonderful media. So it was never really considered an independent art entity on its own. And so I left the gallery and then went to privately work for the artists in their studios, and was working in Benjamin Moore's studio, Dante Marioni's, Preston Singletary's, Richard Royal's, and just developed that as a business, managing their connections with the galleries and the clients and the museums. And so for me, the market was always just a bunch of friends I was working with. My role was to help them find new markets and to promote them, and then also to find new routes to get their work out into emerging markets. I think back in the 90s, glass in America was just this huge tidal wave of interest. And so my part in it was really just in supporting the artists. And I had the unique experience of feeling a part of their teams. So it really was just a big family, still is. And they've just been a part of my life for 25 plus years. I think as far as remembering what I first fell in love with is really hard, because it's so tied to the artists and those experiences. But Kirsty Ray out of Australia did a beautiful body of work that really was modernist and color field studies of the Australian light quality in the landscape. And to me, that was always just really a wonderful way to use the material to get a point across beautifully in a sophisticated manner. And, I think the biggest thing is that I've always looked at it in context of what else is happening on the art market. So I try really hard to look at the artists in context of painters and sculptors, and try not to separate them out. My collecting is a result of experiences I've had with artists. They might have made a piece when I was there and it was a gift, or I got a piece at a student-to-student auction at Pilchuck. I bought from galleries, I've purchased from charity auctions. For the most part, I don't own anything by anyone I don't really personally like. And that's
what a fabulous thing to be able to say.
So because I'm surrounded by my friends in my home, and that feels really special to me. But I am very clear with them what the markets are, and they'll tell you that I'm one of their harshest critics when it comes to values on the market. So
fantastic, thanks so much. Merrily, you've been collecting with your husband, with Rick. I just wondered, what made you start? What was the catalyst?
Rick had lost his first wife, and we had gotten together and found that we loved art, and we went to an auction, and there was a Stephen Powell piece that was up for auction, and we both fell in love with it. I don't know if you know his work, but very large and very colorful. And I think the large and colorful is probably what attracted us initially, but we ended up buying it together before we were even married. And then some friends, Adele and Leonard Blight, who are fabulous collectors, ended up being mentors to us, connected us with Kate Elliott, and we ended up in Seattle, just happenstance, for my birthday the day that Rick asked me to marry him. But that day we spent the morning at Flora Mace and Joy Kirkpatrick's studio with Kate Elliott. And then she took us to Dale Chihuly's boathouse, and we spent the whole afternoon with Dale Chihuly and Kate Elliott and Rick and me, not thinking that was unusual because that was our introduction. So from then we just, those of people who play glass understand it's addicting. And so we had that one piece. Our second piece was a William Morris. And then after that, we now, we started doing similar to what Dina said. We found that we loved the glass art community. The artists were wonderful. The gallerists were wonderful. So we've traveled all over the world, and most of our travels have been associated with either meeting artists or watching art be made. So we just have continued this love of glass now. And continuing. So we still travel, and honestly, I think with the virtual meetings we're having now, we really are learning more because we're sitting through an hour-long presentation of what the artist is doing and what's important to them and what their influences are. So, so we are still very much in love with glass and continuing to collect and continuing to grow our glass artist and glass friend community.
Lovely. That's very moving about you. I like the way that you bought the piece with your husband before he asked you to marry him.
Well, that's why we had to get married.
Giorgio, I mean, you're appropriately on board a boat because you hold these astonishing exhibitions all over the world in different settings. Could you just tell us what drew you to the glass world initially?
Well, actually, I inherited some glasses from the 19th century from my family, and then I randomly sometimes I started buying contemporary glasses, mostly because I love Venice. I go very often to Venice, but I don't collect mainly glasses. I mean, I buy mostly contemporary art.
Oh, but I know that you've worked with artists in glass, haven't you?
Yes. Well, actually, what we do in Nomad, which is my recent business, which is a new concept of doing a fair, we getting all galleries and all artists from all over the world to participating to this unusual showcases. So especially what we did in Venice was to create a sort of community of galleries and artists to do projects around glasses. Of course, not every galleries promote that, but I would say the majority made an effort. For example, David Gill asked Mattia Bonetti to do an entire room with glasses, and there are some young artists, they create the table legs made in glasses. So all this to promote, since we were doing in collaboration with the Glass Week, to promote as much as possible glass in Venice and to open to a possible new collectors, because as you know, in Europe, there are not so many collectors of glasses as in America. And so this, I thought, was a perfect opportunity to help the Glass Week and the glass manufacturers and artists to do this in Venice.
Fantastic. I thought it'd be appropriate, since one of the major exhibitions of Venice Glass Week is Venice and the American Glass Studio, and given the makeup of our panel, I thought that perhaps we should have a look at the relationship of the glass community in Venice and the US. And Dina, I just wondered, for people who are sort of new to this field, if you could just give us a kind of super quick summary of the history of this connection.
Yeah, absolutely. In post-war America, these young people had access to a lot of great craft artisans coming over from Nazi Europe. And so you had great potters coming from Germany and France, and wonderful craftspeople that were leading programs at universities and teaching in smaller programs. And so you had these young people coming up in the 1950s with a big interest in making craft-related objects very technically. And those young people, began to become interested in glass through Harvey Littleton's program at the University of Wisconsin. In 1960, Thomas Stearns had gone over to Italy to do a residency at Venini with Maestro Keiko Ungaro as, I think, the gaffer. And in 1968, Dale Chihuly did a similar thing on a Fulbright scholarship and a Tiffany Foundation grant. And there were other artists like Richard Marquis who went over and learned just the mechanics of glass and then took it out into the world and taught other young people in Australia and throughout the US. So ultimately, this was creating this growing movement in the US and interest because the studio glass movement was so young here that the work people was making was really wonky and heavy, not technical, just not really that good. And so they would soak up any information they could get. And so Benny Moore in 1978 invited Keiko Ungaro to teach at Pilchuck. And he declined the second year invitation and suggested his brother-in-law, who is Lino Talipietra, as the person to come over. And that just set the stage for the real spark of the American studio movement. The artists would sponge up any information he would give them. They were so interested in learning. This just created this dynamic quality up at Pilchuck, and a lot of other Europeans started coming to the school. William Traver introduced Keiko Ungaro's work in the US market, as I understand it, and Lino Talipietra's. And with collecting groups like Merrily is a part of, there was this surge to buy the work in the 1980s and 90s, and values went up. There was a huge positive market growth here, but what it did for Murano was create a bit of a vacuum. And I think they were losing dollars for the tourism and the glass collectors to the Americans. And then I think about 1997, some young artists, including Davide Salvadori, got together to create Centro Studio Vetro to try to engage Murano again in the conversation of glass internationally and take some of the attention away from what was happening in Seattle. And it was a really good effort. I think now we see a bit of an equalizing of the market and the industry. The Italians, like Davide and Lino, and people have interest in really substantial maestro like Livio Seguso, are getting the American dollars in Murano that were really just flooding into Seattle back in the 80s and 90s. And so I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it does. Because Dan, I'd just like to bring you in on this one. I mean, because there has been, Dina touched upon it, that there was this sort of cross-pollination between, I mean, do you feel that the balance between the US and Venice has now been equalized?
Yeah, and I think the information from Dina is really incredible. I mean, there were things there about Chuchi Ongaro I didn't realize, and his involvement in the US as well. From my perspective, sort of looking back to somebody like Paolo Venini, he's such an incredibly important figure in Venetian glass. And I think really he was the visionary that sort of saw the potential in American artists very early on. Even before Thomas Stearns, he invited Charles Tissot to come over from Corning. He also had Eugene Berman come over to design at Venini in the early 1950s. And Ken Scott as well, of course, who's a American fashion designer. So I think really, you know, there's a sort of debt owed to Paolo Venini for really his vision for how America and Venice can collaborate together. And obviously in these early years at Venini, all of these Americans were in general, they were artists, they weren't craftspeople. So, you know, I think Venini sort of saw the the huge potential in what was happening in fine art in America in the early 1950s. And we actually have all the designers I've just mentioned. We're actually offering all of these designers in our forthcoming sale in October, which is the Martin Cohen collection. So it's really exciting to have all of these, different designers who worked at Bernini from America at this period in time.
Great. Merrily, can I ask, because I know that, obviously as a collector, what is it that you feel that the Americans brought to Venice? What was the sort of spirit of their works that was translated?
I think it's the collaboration and the learning, because as Dina said, there really wasn't a methodology to create art in the glass in the beginning. So all of that cultural exchange with the Italians coming here, and of course lots of Americans went to Italy, you can see that influence constantly. And not only in the blown glass, but you can also see influences in other types of glass that are being made, but have that bit of an Italian influence. So it still continues. We still have huge numbers of Americans when we could go to Italy. Of course, we're not going there right now, but traveling and studying and working. And Richard Jolly just did a wonderful collaboration over there. I think he's been 2 or 3 times, and I'm continuing to see artists that it surprises me that they are, going over and working and spending time. And I think that love of the Italians, number one, because it's such a warm and wonderful, as an Orsini, I could probably say that, but wonderful and warm and sharing. So, I spent a weekend over once with Leslie Jenninger, and just going into places that I would never have been able to go into. A morning with Olivia Seguso, for instance. And those influences, not only on the collectors, but on the artists, are just amazing, and they continue.
Fantastic. Well, actually, you raised a point there, talking about the connection of people, of artists who began working in glass, and those who saw their primary expression as being a crafts person. I think we've all gone beyond that kind of endless debate about is it art or craft, because we just see these astonishing pieces and we all want them, and I think that's far more important. But it is interesting. I do wonder whether you think that fine artists, and I think you've touched upon this already, did actually bring a new audiences to glass. Since we're talking about collecting glass, do you think that fine artists, or those who termed themselves fine artists, then began working in glass, and that they brought in a whole new constituency? I just wondered what you thought about that.
Well, definitely they have. I was in Art Basel in Basel probably 5 years ago, and there were 3 or 4 pieces of glass. And this last December at Art Miami and Art Basel in Miami, it was everywhere. So Olafur Eliasson, Ai Weiwei, Josiah McElhaney. There's all kinds of artists now that we're seeing in glass, and the medium is becoming something much more accepted. So it's refreshing and wonderful to walk into a fine art situation and see beautiful art made from glass.
Giorgio, what are your thoughts on the role of galleries in promoting glass?
Well, as I said, in Venice last year was a big success, and I spoke with certain galleries, and they told me that they were definitely much more interested in the young collectors in glasses. Of course, glasses for Italians or Europeans, it's a kind of a niche. It's very expensive, so, and I think it's kind of is a new thing. But for example, just to answer one of your questions before, one of the high jewelry designer in Venice, Antonio Miletto, was the first one which I think used 3 major glass artists, you know, Laura Santillana and Lily Tabasso and Maria Grazia Rosini in jewelry. And this is, I think, a very smart way also to promote the work of this great artists in a different way, because, you know, people buying jewelry, but you buy a piece of jewelry, which is also a piece of glass.
So Dina, do you think that artists could be accused of taking the limelight or sort of sucking some of the attention away from people who term themselves crafts?
No, I mean, you know, I think, oh, sorry about that. I think with every market, the tastemakers are the dealers and the curators, and they create the markets and the positioning. And, you know, contemporary artists have been working with different materials, and glass artists have been working with different materials for ages. I think the idea of ghettoizing either in one market versus another is problematic. You know, it's the work has to exist in a conversation with other work. And so if you're an artist working in glass and you have no concept and all you can do is make a beautiful object with nothing behind it, then there's a problem. If you're a contemporary artist that has a great concept that can't make anything, that's a problem. And I think bringing these worlds together is always important. I think the more collectors see something on the market, the more interested they are in buying it. Collectors tend to like things they feel are new, but often those of us who work in the markets understand that these things have been around for a few years before collectors start purchasing them. And so, so with contemporary artists using the media, it really is just introducing new people to it. I mean, what I'm talking about with dealers lately is that collectors who are buying the work now are not that interested in the media as much as they are the message. And so you have an incredible contemporary artist like Fred Wilson, who was a Pilchuck artist in residence. He represented America in the Venice Biennale with his Black Murano glass mirrors, speaking to the Black experience in Venice or in Europe. And he has made it into all these other, you know, he's in museums. One of those pieces from his Othello series is in the Corning Museum of Glass. He does use gaffers like Dante Marioni, whose work is behind me in Seattle, but they're all working collaboratively. The one really good thing about the community of this artist community, I'm sorry, is that they're used to collaborating. And Trujillo brought that over from Venice in the early days. He patterned his studio after that means of working. And so all these artists are kind of understanding it and they're joining in with each other. They'll all work on one team for a week and then pay all the same guys to work on another team for another week. So the best thing that can happen is that there is a lively, interesting art market taking place that incorporates the material, and that we as professionals in the industry try to keep it away from being subjected to being one niche market, and we try to integrate it into the larger art world.
Well, and that actually brings me on to another question that I think concerns us all, is how do we engage, you know, the next generation, you know, those collectors coming up? I mean, Dan, perhaps you can just talk about the, because you're in New York, and yet you also know the European market. Do you see that there are different sorts of collections between the two, or do you think that it's a generational thing?
There are different I mean, there's definitely a younger breed of collector that's really popped up in the past 5 years. And I think sort of looking back to 2012, there was the incredible Carlo Scarpa retrospective at the Met, and that really got the momentum going again for Italian glass. And that really I think that was a hugely sort of influential sort of moment. And I'd say in the last 5 years, I've seen a lot more sort of younger collectors sort of popping up. And I think the Cini Foundation, La Stanza del Vetro, are doing an amazing job with their projects, promoting the different Vanini designers. and all the books that they produce as well, you know, and the blockbuster exhibitions, these all help to, you know, give people information, you know, collectors, and it kind of gives people confidence to collect and to buy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's certainly younger collectors. I'm seeing that the collectors that are coming through now, they tend to engage more online, whereas the, you know, the older collectors that I'm more used to dealing with for the past 20 years, you know, they're the kind of people that would go to flea markets and would kind of, you know, meet up in person and go to galleries. But I'm seeing a lot more now where it's people are finding the information online. So it's almost like the flea market has migrated to the internet. And that's kind of like the new sort of platform really for collectors to meet and discuss and to source new pieces.
I'm just wondering whether, Giorgio, have you found that the collectors in Europe tend to be people who integrate glass into their collections? So I'm just thinking that, you know, you have a sort of they buy best in class bit of glass,
Yeah.
then they'll buy the blue chip painting, then they'll buy this astonishing bit of furniture. So that
Exactly.
do you find that?
Yeah. I know a lot of people like that. I mean, they buy, of course, blue chip works of art, and they buy amazing glasses. I mean, in Venice, I cannot mention who they are, but in Venice, I saw a few examples like that, but also in London, also in certain houses in Milan, definitely in Switzerland as well. So yes, they are. But unfortunately, they're not. But unfortunately, as I said, unfortunately, they're not young people. I mean, we're talking about collectors from 50 to 60 to 70. You know, they're not young.
Yeah. When I say young collectors, I mean people in their 30s and 40s. That's a young collector.
And in Italy, I think, or in Europe, I think it's a little bit difficult. Don't you think? The young people from the 30s and the 40s starting to collect. I mean, I wish.
Yeah.
So Dan, have you seen the 30-year-olds or the 30-year-olds that are coming in to, say, auctions and talk to you about glass?
Yeah, well, I am, but the thing is that, you know, that they're definitely sort of starting off online first and buying things on places like eBay. You know, that's where they're starting, and you know, then they're saying, you know, I bought this thing, you know, is it right? Can you tell me about it? And I'm engaging on that side, because they're coming to us for, you know, for help on sort of working out, you know, authentication and identification. So that's kind of, you know, as an auction house, that's our kind of role really with these young collectors, is to be a kind of a resource, I think. I
know, Merrily, you were saying when we were talking last week, you were talking about how you were actively seeking to engage the next generation, these 30s to 40-year-olds.
Yes, we are. And actually, AACG, the Art Alliance for Contemporary Glass, does have a significant number of very young collectors. And right now, since March the 20th, we have been having weekly, what we call meetups, and they last for an hour. They're all virtual, and we are really drawing in a very wide audience. So I think the younger collectors are already interested. We do, every week we have a different program. It's either an artist or a gallery or a museum curator, and it's a pretty in-depth discussion, or sometimes tour, but introduction to the artist, to their work, to what's important to those artists. Recently, we did one that was with Tom Hawk Gallery in Columbus that was artists who are using technology in glass, and it was absolutely fascinating. And the artists were young, and the art that they were creating was so amazing and different. And the other thing that's happening is people are actually purchasing art through after these meetups, because they're being introduced to them. So we are seeing younger people. I mean, I was just thinking, we have a couple of new members that I know are right around 30, and then we have some in their 40s. So it's happening. We are reaching a younger audience simply because we are having these in-depth regular meetings. And those meetings, by the way, are just for our members. to join in order to come to the meeting. So we're also increasing our membership substantially. So it's been one positive silver lining of COVID has been that we are growing our community and we are learning more and we are still buying art, but it's all virtual.
But it also sounds as if one of the advantages of the virtual approach is that these collectors can have unprecedented access to artists.
It's amazing, yes.
So, you know, Dina, before, you know, you were in a very privileged position of working closely with artists, and it must make an enormous difference for the access to be broadened. Are you also seeing a younger generation, sort of 30-year-olds coming into the field?
To what Giorgio said, I completely agree with him in that the next generation that I'm seeing and that some of the dealers I'm speaking to are seeing is really not necessarily younger folks, but just a different type of collector. And so whereas I think historically in the US, we became very used to groups like and Merrily and I know each other through this, who would travel and go to studios and such. The new generation of collector that I'm seeing, and that I talked to Katja Heller in New York about this and Sarah Traver in Seattle, we're seeing people who are really doing so much of it online. And they're looking on Instagram and they're, I mean, I'm doing the same thing. You're looking online, you're trying to find new things. These are the folks that would attend the Art Miami fairs, and they'd be going to Design Miami and Art Basel and Pulse and Untitled. So they're going to all these fairs looking at a lot of different types of objects in design, modernist work, like what Dan is dealing with, or more contemporary work. And now that everything has moved online, I've been taking advantage of the art fair portals and then going into a deep dive into the galleries that I like. But what I've been doing for years is asking a gallery to send me a picture of one of their attendants next to the artwork so my clients can see scale. So that hasn't changed. You know, if I have a client that's a corporate client across country, I will say, will you please have two people hold this painting up, and I can send them a picture so that you know what you would be looking at really versus just looking at dimensions. That's very hard for the regular person to understand. I've literally taped off my wall behind me for clients to show them where pedestals should be placed. And so I think the dealers and the artists that are taking advantage of all of this great technology, I mean, it's exhausting, the online stuff at times, but the people who are taking advantage of it can much more quickly sort through work, sort through what they want. They can acquire from people that Giorgio's working with, and they can go to Bonham's and talk to Dan, and then they can talk to me and say, is what Bonham's offering a good price? I mean, they can go between all of us. And I think technology and this next generation of collectors is doing it. They're much more versatile. They're much more nimble. And like Giorgio said, they're buying one special something for a certain piece that's really, really well, or certain place that they might own that's really well made, versus just a lot of objects to build entire collections based on a certain genre. So even though I've had the access, oftentimes I'll text the artist and say, hey, send me a picture, send me a video. The dealers who are doing that right now are the ones who are really growing their markets. And there are dealers right now who are telling me that they're having better years than last year because they're doing these sorts of virtual offerings, and they're doing videos in their galleries weekly talking about a certain work. It's fantastic. I mean, it's terrible and fantastic at the same time.
Now we've got about a few minutes left. The time has absolutely flown. So we've got a few moments. If anybody wants to post a question, we'd be happy to put it to the panel. While I'm waiting for a couple of questions to pop up, I just wondered if any of you could name a sort of game-changing exhibition. Dan, you mentioned the Carlo Scarpa at the Met, and I'm just wondering whether exhibitions have changed the way that we look at glass and have again broadened the access. But I just wondered if I could just go around you all and ask if there was one exhibition that you felt had shifted the needle. Giorgio, why don't we start with you?
Well, for me, not because Camilla is here, for me, the best exhibition on glasses is the Stanza del Vetro. And I love the one on Tommaso Buzzi a few years ago.
Lovely, thanks. Merrily, what about you?
Do you know, the new Glass Now exhibit that was at Carnegie Museum of Glass this past year, I thought was amazing and really stretched the boundaries of what we think about as art and glass. But I will have to say that Chihuly over Venice, those many years ago, I can't even remember what year it was, but I think that introduced the average person to glass that would never have known about it before.
Wonderful. Dina, what about you?
When the George and Dorothy Sachs wing opened at the de Young in San Francisco, the de Young Museum is an encyclopedic museum, and they integrated their collection into all of the different galleries. So Karen Lamont was next to a bunch of Greek female sculptures. And that integration really set the stage for other museums to take note. And you started seeing that approach to exhibiting glass at the Chrysler and these different museums that were working with different genres and media and periods.
Brilliant. Dan, obviously you've already mentioned one.
I've already mentioned one. I'm going to be very predictable. I'm sorry, I'm going to say La Stanza del Vetro again. Thomas Stearns, I mean, such an important designer that really sort of helped change the landscape of glassmaking, I think. So I think really that was a sensational exhibition.
Now we have a question, and just to show how global we are, it's from El Salvador. And our listener is asking, what does Latin America need to place its glass artists at a good or desirable level? So what does Latin America have to do in order to compete with the European markets and with the US? Dina.
You know, I think for any artist I've ever worked with, the goal is to find the right market for you and for the artist. I think there are buyers of everything out there, and my role is to direct my clients to pieces that I think are the best for them, not to direct them towards a specific thing that I like, but what I think is best for them. So if for artists that are working in other countries that are trying to break into markets, actually, Latin American art, when it comes to op art and 20th century contemporary art, has been huge in the auction market. Yeah. There's been a lot of interest. A piece that a client bought for $30,000 sold for $100,000 through Bonhams a few years ago. So I think there's interest. The question is, with any artist I've ever worked with, it is how do you find the right dealer who's going to be excited about your work, who will be excited to introduce you to collectors like Merrily, who will take you to fairs like what Giorgio's doing. And I don't know if it has to be, we're not really place specific anymore. We're dealing internationally, as we can see. Someone from Germany found Dante's work online last week, he said, and bought some pieces. You know, that's really how it's working now. So for any artist, you just have to find the right market and the right person who really loves your work, stands behind it, wants to take it to places like Venice Glass Week and expose you to new collectors. It's always a challenge, and but there's so much out there that we haven't seen, and it's exciting to think what new people and new communities are going to do with it.
Fantastic. Now we've got another question. To what degree are newer collectors buying established brand names versus just selecting the work they appreciate? Giorgio, what do you say to that one?
Yeah. Can you repeat the question?
So I think it's a question about, are people buying blue chip glass artists or blue chip artists versus newer work that they just appreciate, that they just fall in love with? It's quite difficult, I would have thought, that question.
Yeah.
I think you would always encourage people to buy what they like, wouldn't you?
Absolutely, yeah. I think also in a way, I'm again sorry to talk about Nomad. The difference of Nomad towards other fairs, it's because we do it in a private houses. So each piece that the gallery display in each room acquires a different kind of look, you know, because when you have a piece of glass or a sculpture, a piece of or a work of art in a fair, like in this tent or in convention center, doesn't appeal as good as the objects or the works of art that we display at Nomad, because Nomad we have a house, so every pieces it's contextualized in each room. So I think it's even if it's, I mean, a piece of Scarpa can sell as much as a piece of a young artist or a glass artist, because, you know, it's so well presented in this house. So at that point, who doesn't really have the connaissance, you know, the refinement or the knowledge, they will buy because they like the piece.
Yeah, it's the context.
Exactly. There is
Yeah,
context. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, certainly from an auction perspective, you know, Carlo Scarpa has become a brand name since 2012, since the Met show. So Carlo Scarpa is a huge name. Thomas Stearns is a huge name, and you know, you do get people who will just buy the big brand names. But on the other side, you know, we had an auction of Cenedesi glass about 3 years ago, and Cenedesi is a more minor, lesser known workshop in Murano. But we had huge interest in that. So yeah, you do get the people that follow and have to buy the big names, but you also do get part of the market that also engages with new pieces and likes to discover new factories and designers. And
brilliant. We've got time for one last question, which has come in from Howard Cohen. And Howard has asked, when you're working with clients, who are the glass artists that you show first?
Depends on the client. It depends on the client. If they want, you know, if they're looking for something that they think will be more of an investment piece, you show them one thing. And if they're a couple like Merrily and Rick who were exploring in their early days and developing this together, you show them something that you think they're going to love. I mean, there are clients who I specifically work with who want artists from a very specific community, and there are others that just are very whimsical and just like things that make them smile. It really depends on the buyer, and you just have to. I'm not going to throw names out, but it just depends on who the client is and what their goals are. It's all about identifying your goals, learning as much as you can as a collector, asking as many questions, talking to people like Dan, joining groups like Merrily's and learning what other collectors have learned. And then to what Giorgio also said about looking at it in different environments, because artwork doesn't exist just in a gallery all the time. You have to live with it. So, you know, look, ask questions, and make sure you get a sense of what you're looking for personally.
I think that's a brilliant note on which to end. I know we've run out of time, but thank you all so much for such a brilliant and fascinating discussion. I've learned such a lot. So Camilla, handing back to you.
Thank you so much, Lucinda. Yeah, on behalf of the Venice Glass Week Organising Committee, but also just personally, I'd like to thank you all so much, because I agree, Lucinda, it really was such a brilliant conversation. Really, Lucinda, I knew you would be a superb moderator, but you genuinely have exceeded expectations. Your questions were brilliant, and you managed to weave everybody's different perspectives from different corners of the market and different corners of the world so well together. And to all of our speakers, Dan, Dina, Giorgio, and Merrily, thank you so much for giving up an hour of your very valuable time to share your different viewpoints as well. To our sponsor Apice, represented by Marta, thank you so much for facilitating today's conversation, and actually the whole programme, which continues tomorrow, Wednesday, the 9th of September at 11 a.m. in the morning, Italian time. The topic is Fragile, Handle with Care, the fine art of transporting glass, which maybe collectors will be interested in as well as all our speakers. We'll be joined by various representatives across the company at Apice for that. And it might just also be worth mentioning to everybody who's listening that if you've been listening to this conversation, you can't have failed to miss the accolades for Le Stanze del Vetro, obviously many people's favorite place to find glass. Venice and American Studio Glass is the exhibition that's on at the moment. It launched this week with the Venice Glass Week, and it's actually on until January. But this Friday, the 11th at 5 p.m. Italian time, we've got another conversation where we're very lucky to be joined by the co-curators of that exhibition. So Tina Oldknow and William Warmush, together with three of the artists who are represented in the show. So Dan Daly, Benjamin Moore, and Nancy Callan, as well as an important guest, David Landau, who is a trustee of the Foundation Pentagram Stiftung, which is, together with the Cini Foundation, responsible for Le Stanze del Vetro project. And he's also the founding member of the Venice Glass Week. So another really interesting and high-profile panel to look forward to on Friday, which you can find, as always, on the YouTube channel of the Venice Glass Week. But obviously back to today's event, thank you to Apice, thank you to our brilliant moderator and to all of our speakers. It's genuinely been a huge treat and a privilege to be joined by you all today. And thank you so much to everyone who's been listening and for the excellent questions as well. Hopefully you'll join us over the next few days with our other conversations. Hopefully this time next year, though, more importantly, maybe you'll be able to join us here in Venice once the world travel situation calms down a little bit. But in the meantime, thank you all again. And if you're interested in finding out more about the Venice Glass Week, by all means, go to the website www.theveniceglassweek.com. And this particular talk will remain on our YouTube channel, because I feel like I'm certainly going to be re-listening to pick up on all the various different points that were raised. And so, yes, if you want to hear more, here again, the YouTube channel is where to find it. So thank you all, and bye. Bye from Venice.
Bye.
Bye.
Hi, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.